you start to understand the intersection between like human behavior and the built environment. And it's like seeing the Matrix and like, oh, the entire world that we built for ourselves, it can be extremely isolating depending on the house that you grew up in or the neighborhood that you grew up in. You become a city planner by caring about that and realizing that it can be changed.
Welcome to the Community Center for Eryngo Urbanism, a show about bringing people together, even across sizable distances and over the course of many years. I'm Kyler. I'll be your host for today. I'm an architect and design communicator based out of Oklahoma City. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest who will be helping us answer the question, how do our cities plan for regional connectivity and long-term success? Ethan Mazzio, welcome to the show. Could you start us off by telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, my name is Ethan Mazzio. I've been working with the Association of Central Oklahoma Governments as a transportation planner and mobility. It's kind of halfway in fixed route transit services, as well as the other half is bike and pedestrian infrastructure. I've been doing that for about 9 months now. And before that, I was a remote worker for an organization based out of Washington, D.C. called the Mayor's Institute on City Design. Did that for about 2 years. Before that, I was at the University of Oklahoma for regional and city planning. So I'm on the younger side of my career, but I've always been an Oklahoma City fan. The development of the city is what really made me want to get into city planning, and I'm really happy to be able to be a part of that.
So what actually is the Association of Central Oklahoma Governments, also ACOG? What is it?
Yeah, it's weird. I actually did like a paper about this when I was in grad school because I was interning here in community and economic development while I was in grad school. And I was trying to learn about what authorities, COGs, councils of government, have innately to them. And it's a bit of a mixed bag. The Association of Central Oklahoma Governments does a lot of things for the Central Oklahoma region, which is our jurisdiction is Canadian County, Cleveland County, Oklahoma County, and Logan County. We handle principally transportation planning for the region, which means that we oversee the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, which is a 30-year transportation plan. We oversee a bunch of different regional planning efforts. We are also kind of the center for technical and policy committees for transportation in the region. And we facilitate a lot of conversations between practitioners and political leaders in the region regarding transportation and general planning as well. In the community and economic development side of things, we manage something called the Comprehensive Economic Development Study, which is something that's required for sub-state planning districts to put out every 5 to 10 years by the Economic Development Administration. It's basically just a big region-wide economic development plan. We also do a lot of water resource management for the region, which is something that when you look at the aquifer systems, these are things that span jurisdictions and that need some regional coordination to them. And then one of the things that ACOG does specifically that many others don't is we provide 911 services to a lot of our smaller municipalities, which is something that's vital for all of our municipalities and certainly the smaller ones. So I think that's basically it when it comes to ACOG services that it actually does. So ACOG is what people call a council of governments, also known as a regional council. They're known by a lot of different names across the country. They're also established in a lot of different ways across the country. In the state of Oklahoma, they are sub-state planning districts. So they are enabled by the state government, and they're basically just divvying up certain amounts of counties across the state government, and they kind of act on behalf of the state government in a sense. They are not, though, state agencies. They do not have to go through the HR process of being hired on by the state of Oklahoma or anything like that. It's almost kind of two organizations that meet in the middle. The sub-state planning districts that got created in Oklahoma started in 1970. And then at the same time, or around the same time, ACOG, the Council of Governments, all of the political leaders of this region's cities and counties created voluntarily the actual administrative structure incorporation of the organization in 1966. And then a few years later in 1970 is when it got granted the sub-state planning power. And so it's almost kind of two administrative structures or two enabling functions that created one organization. Yeah.
Cool. I am totally interested in both the general what it does and the very niche what is it even. So I think that's interesting to hear both of those, because actually I didn't know some of that. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the role of a mobility planner and how it's different from other types of planning and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So like I said, I've been doing the mobility planner role for about 9 months now with ACOG. I'm halfway into fixed route transit, which for the Oklahoma City area is mostly bus services as well as paratransit services. And then the other half is in bike and pedestrian infrastructure. It's a bit of a weird spot to be in because, if I was in the one half, I'd be, closely monitoring everything that the Regional Transportation Authority of Central Oklahoma does and going to every meeting of the Central Oklahoma Transportation and Parking Authority, all these things. Because I'm kind of in both, it's focusing on transportation on a regional scale. And you're not just putting lines on maps, you're working a lot more with the statistics and the impacts across an entire system. So one of the things that we do when it comes to transit, fixed route transit, is plan for the long-term future. One of the ways that we're doing that is through the long-range transit plan, which is a coordinated effort with the Oklahoma City Maps office and a bunch of other stakeholders in Edmond and Norman and as Oklahoma City as well. That one is planning for a 30-year time horizon for the growth of fixed route transit services. And so we've been going around over the past few months doing presentations to all of the necessary boards and commissions about what that's going to look like, the kind of service demand that's going to change into the near future, the kind of demands that are going to be expected of the cities that are opting into the commitments that are made in this plan. We're getting to the point now where we don't have lines on maps. It's not that specific. It's not that granular, but we do have a good idea about what the service increases are going to be for our municipalities over the next 10 years, 20 years, and then 30 years. And we're looking at, in terms of vehicle miles, in terms of fleet sizes, we're looking at doubling and tripling some of the sizes of our fleets, the amount of vehicle miles traveled that we'll be putting on the roads in the coming years. It's something that when you take that to your city councils, it's a lot of intergovernmental conversations and balancing, managing expectations, making sure that the way that you're communicating is not just accurate, but also digestible. And I'm not going to sit here and say that it's politics, but when you're managing these kinds of things over the span of a region, the most important thing is keeping everybody on board. And so you don't have to work for just one stakeholder municipality. You're working with several. I guess that's the most I could say about fixed route transit. The bike pedestrian infrastructure stuff, it can be easier in some ways. What I do in my day-to-day, at least what I've been doing over the past few months, is managing and kind of evaluating some grant programs that we have that largely fund bike and pedestrian infrastructure. The one that we're about to launch a call for projects for is called the Air Quality Small Grants Program, that historically was mostly used for sidewalk and bike lane projects in the central Oklahoma. Last round, we put about $4 million into sidewalks and bike lanes in central Oklahoma. And that's one where we put out a call for projects, and then every municipality from across our transportation management area have an opportunity to put in their application. It's a competitive grant process. And the regional component to that is we're helping people build this infrastructure. We're also trying to look at the bigger picture of an interconnected network that is compatible with our regional active transportation plan, making sure that these are cohesive and that run across jurisdiction, especially since, Oklahoma City aside, a lot of our jurisdictions are very small and can be a little bit disparate across from each other.
So you talked about the long-range transit plan and how it may significantly, at least, recommend increasing services on a lot of lines and things. First of all, that's mostly focused on the local buses, right? Because the BRT stuff is under maps, and the RTA stuff, which I should specify, Bus Rapid Transit, MAPS is the metropolitan area projects. It's a tax package that we do here in OKC to fund a bunch of things. And then the Regional Transportation Authority of Oklahoma is doing the commuter rail, light rail, and a couple of other BRT things that are a little more long-term. I'm curious, the long-range transit plan, I've heard it talked about in the context of both of those conversations as sort of it's referencing those things are referencing it. It's kind of a interconnected web. I'm curious how that plan, once it's implemented or once it's accepted, is it a guarantee that those service increases will happen, or is it just here's what we want to do, and then we're actually going to cut the budget instead?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're asking is a good question that's hits to the core ideas behind planning in general. Anytime a municipality makes, a comprehensive plan or even something as small as a corridor plan where there is, one central entity that's executing that plan, assuming that that city adopts the plan that its own staffers make, it is only as real as the city council's political will to implement it. It's city managers' willingness to maintain a budget for it in a way that maintains that trajectory. The long range transit plan, the kind of general schedule of it is we've been going through the evaluation, developing recommendations and implementation plan over the summertime, also communicating this as we make progress and learn more to the relevant constituent bodies across Oklahoma City, Edmond, and Norman. We're shooting for adoption first with ACOG adoption in November or December of this year, maybe a little bit earlier than that, we'll see. And then we'll go to the rest of the municipal boards and commissions, starting with mobility commissions and kind of moving up the chain to city councils based on how those bodies recommend. When you go to a city council or when you go to a chief body of any entity as a planner, asking them to accept a plan, what you're really doing is you're asking them to commit to the things that are in the plan. That you're asking them to say, we agree with this and we're going to hold to it. And again, like where we started is that commitment is only as good as the execution day to day, to month, year to year, throughout the course of that plan. And so, through the course of the long range transit plan, if we get to year 5 in the city of Edmond or the city of Norman are realizing that, gosh, we have to put a lot more buses on the road and really step up our service. And they don't have money for it, or maybe the federal climate is unexpected. There might not be a continuation of the low no emission bus program or any other number of bus fleet replacement programs in the federal government. Then you change course. And with the long range transit plan or with a lot of other plans that are long range like that, you will inevitably every 5 years, every 10 years, kind of reevaluate how much progress you've made and make adjustments so that you can stay on track with those things. Yeah, I don't like dismantling these things that we make as humans, but really honestly, like all these plans are just words on paper. And the real thing that makes them happen is, staffers putting in the labor every day, city councils having the political will to vote on these things and know that they are good for their communities. And like I said before, city managers allow the money to go into the places that it needs to go.
The other thing that I've heard about the long range transit plan is that a lot of the more local bus service recommendations are going to be based around the idea that there will be these more regional transportation that will be going alongside those improvements. So can you talk about how you think transportation will change in the OKC area over the next 30 years?
Yeah. There's a few elements to it. Right now, what we have in terms of, your bread and butter transit service in the Oklahoma City metropolitan area broadly is kind of standard bus service with like 30-minute plus headways on most of your fixed routes. There are, like you mentioned before, bus rapid transit routes across some of our more major commuter corridors that have 15-minute headways for those services. They have better buses. That's a premium service that we're going to be implementing more even in the near future that we'll at least see from Oklahoma City. But that serves, relative to the region, very few people. And so when we're talking about that's bus service. We also have this thing called paratransit service that a lot of communities are getting into that is individualized services that use smaller vehicles. And it's almost like a public Uber service, essentially. A lot of these things can be specialized. We have specialized kind of sub programs, or Embark has specialized sub programs that they use for organizations like CSU Youth and Pivot that offer specialized services and house at-risk youth. That these services help them get to their jobs, help them get to school, help them do a number of things that they otherwise wouldn't be able to do living in like a standard kind of family dynamic. There's also specialized services for seniors, people with disabilities that paratransit service really comes into play for. One of the things that plenty of people have talked about and that is coming down the pike, whether fast or slow, is commuter rail transit. And that's something that I I couldn't tell you if it's 10 to 20 to 30 years in the future. It's probably less than 30 years in the future.
One would hope.
What I do know is the entity that's working on bringing commuter rail service to the Oklahoma City metropolitan area, which is the Regional Transportation Authority of Central Oklahoma. They're doing good work. They have good consultants providing sound recommendations to them. We are well positioned with our legislators in Washington, D.C., to be able to do this, to actually bring commuter rail to the region in the near-ish, maybe midterm future. The big question with that is going to be if it can get a steady funding stream from cities, which will be by public vote in the next couple of years, probably sometime in the next 16 months or so. That's kind of all the different modes of transit that we have or will have in the foreseeable future. Streetcar aside, streetcar is light rail transit that mostly goes in circles around the downtown and Bricktown area, and it's a transit service, but it's not it doesn't have a broad base of use in the same way that these other transit services do in the region. In the next 5 to 10 years for bus services, we are probably going to see an expansion of bus services out to the western and eastern extents of the region, not so far as El Reno, but certainly out to Yukon Mustang to the west, and then maybe Piedmont as well, I would imagine. And then to the east, we'll probably see services that have special purposes going out to Choctaw, Spencer, and Hera in the near future. One of the things that the long-range transit plan is bringing to us is a way to make these services more attainable by making the systems more efficient. We have kind of three transit providers in the region right now. That's Embark. Embark is kind of the doing business as name for COPPA, which is the Central Oklahoma Transportation and Parking Authority. They serve Oklahoma City and kind of select areas of the broader metropolitan area. There's Norman, which has kind of two transit services to it. There's the Cleveland Area Rapid Transit, which mostly services the University of Oklahoma area to getting to and from the University of Oklahoma. And there is also a branch of Embark that serves the Norman area and serves express services in between Norman and Oklahoma City. We also then have this thing called CityLink in Edmond, which serves the Edmond area and also has an express route that goes down to Oklahoma City. One of the things that the LRTP is going to bring us is a way to consolidate and kind of mesh these services in a way that makes things more efficient. Specifically, there's not route overlaps, there's not duplication, there's ways for us to have shared software systems, and shared software systems can help us understand how our networks fit together, can understand where our routes can be adjusted to accommodate worse or better ridership numbers. If we have the same software systems, we can then have the same prioritization systems for our signaling. We can have a lot of other elements like that that can make the system run better as a region. So that's that. And I think that we'll be able to achieve the efficientizing of the system in the next 10 years for sure. And from there, that sets us a good foundation on which to build and expand that service. We'll probably be expanding service before the 10-year mark, but it's kind of just a conceptual way to look at it. Paratransit service has been kind of expanding in the outskirts of in the more rural parts of the region for a couple of years now. It's a lot of, like I said before, a lot of particular populations, at-risk youth, seniors, people with disabilities, using these services to get to the hospital, get to the social security office, getting to work, getting to school. One of the hard parts about these kind of services is that the denser parts of our communities are the places that get bus service because they have enough riders that the bus service can be supported by the fares. When you get out to the more remote parts of the region, you get into paratransit service. The city of Choctaw might see that the city of Spencer is getting paratransit service, and they might be a little bit farther away from the main hub for service in central Oklahoma City, but they're going to still say, hey, we want that service too. And it makes it a little bit harder to go that extra distance out east to provide paratransit service to those populations. And so there's constantly this ebb and flow of demand for expansion that paratransit service as a smaller, more nimble, but fundamentally less efficient system is going to face when it comes to the rural extents of the central Oklahoma area. In the next 10 years, we probably are not going to get ribbon cutting in the first people stepping onto a commuter rail that crosses from Norman to Oklahoma City to Edmond. But what we could, I think, likely get is areas of the primarily BNSF railroad that goes north and south from Edmond down to Norman, where we'll see some adjustments for at-grade crossings. Actually, the state of Oklahoma got a good grant to do 52 or so evaluations of railroad crossings, mostly for safety, but we know that it's going to be going to like the benefit of the RTA and the benefit of freight corridors. Then in the next 10 years or so, we will also probably see that same corridor get improvements such as like double tracking in certain areas. We'll see recommendations to municipal bodies about areas where you're crossing highways or you're crossing roads and there's already established bridges, but those bridges don't have a double track. They need a second track that's built adjacent to it. So you need a second bridge built adjacent to those kinds of things. So we can start to see construction happen for those things in the next 10 years, maybe even the next 5 if we pass these tax initiatives in middle to late 2026. Might be a little bit optimistic of a way to look at it because there will be a lot of planning involved in getting this done. But I think that it's possible for sure.
So I would also say as a mobility planner, you probably have a unique perspective on the intersection of transit and pedestrian infrastructure, like bus stops that are good for people and that are not just out in the middle of nowhere. How are you guys approaching this multimodal aspect of things, of connecting from one way of getting around to another?
Yeah, if we want to talk about bus stops. So in order to get to a bus stop, you're going to probably walk there. You might take your bike there, but you're probably going to walk there. In order to walk to a bus stop and not be like walking in the road and get hit by a car, you need a sidewalk. One of the key issues, I don't think Oklahoma City is particularly unique in this, but we have a really patchy sidewalk network. And so we want to fill gaps when it comes to sidewalks. I'll come around back to sidewalks in a minute. When you get to the bus stop, if you're waiting at a bus stop in the Oklahoma City metropolitan area, there's a 90-something% chance that you're not sitting at a bus stop that's being serviced by bus rapid transit, which means that you could be waiting there for 30 minutes. You could be waiting there for longer, depending on what line and service you're receiving or waiting for. And so you get to this challenge of, man, I would really like to sit down, or I'd like to be shaded. And a lot of the bus stops in the metropolitan area are signs stuck in the ground and not benches, or they're benches, but they're not sheltered. You have to see this through the lens of a human lived experience. In the last couple of weeks, it's been like a high of 92 to 95 degrees basically every day. And it's not convenient to be waiting out for a bus for longer than 10 minutes in that kind of weather, especially if you have to stand there and wait for the bus, especially if you have to stand there and wait for the bus in the grass. So when it comes to the multimodal planning in Oklahoma City, I'm not going to say that we're behind other cities as compared to like the next city over that is of a similar size to ours. I don't know that for sure. But what I would say is that you do have to start somewhere before you can get to everybody being serviced by bus rapid transit that has a dedicated lane and also has like a station that's elevated to the same level boarding. Before you do any of those things, you have to put benches everywhere. Before you do all those things, you have to have sidewalks to get to these places. And it's not so simple as like all of these things have to come before all of these things. Because we are doing this across jurisdictions, all of these things are happening at different intervals for different places. The things that ACOG can do to try to assist in making these changes happen is when anybody applies for a grant program, at least bike and pedestrian infrastructure or transit improvements, they have to comply with a couple of our rules. It's one of the biggest rules that we have that we implemented, I think about 5 years ago, is the Complete Streets Policy. Complete Streets Policy is not novel to our area. It's something that the federal government, FHWA, Federal Highway Administration, recommends that its COGs and its grantees and sub-grantees utilize. The way that we mandate them for people that we give money to is you have to meet certain design criteria in places that have an appropriately low amount of annual average daily traffic. You have sidewalks on both sides of the street. You have bike lanes or you have shared bikeways. We prefer separated bike lanes. You have a specific width of your sidewalks that is a minimum of 3 feet to meet Americans with Disability Act standards. We don't have crazy high standards when it comes to our Complete Streets Policy, but you have to meet the region where it is. And this region for a long time has not made public investments in this way. And you work on the margins until you can really push the bill to make substantive improvements. And where you already have a little bit of goodwill, such as like, the denser parts of central Oklahoma City, where there's already a lot of separated bike lanes, already a lot of sidewalks, you can ask more. You can meet them at the margins that they're at there.
No, yeah, I think that's good. I'm gonna ask maybe a little more abstract question this time. In your professional opinion, what is the purpose of a street?
Streets are economic foundations. When you're building a city, I've never built a city before, so I don't really know. I've also never witnessed the building of a city before, so I don't really know. But my education tells me that in the building of cities, there start out two things. There are buildings and there are streets. Streets are public places, first and foremost. They're the places that you build to connect a person's house to a person's house, or a person's business to a person's business, services and goods, people. In some ways, they're the first parks. They're the first public spaces that we made, is at least in American society, that people utilize, that everybody utilizes. It's kind of the common denominator for humans to do society. And whether you're going to a person's house, or you're going to the cobbler, or you're going to the haberdashery, or you're going to get a meal, you're probably going to take a street. You might take the sidewalk next to the street, but you're going to take a street. These are the foundations upon which human connection, commerce, culture are built. I don't know which came first between buildings and streets, but when you're mapping out what your city is going to look like, you have to have these empty spaces for people to pass through to get to the places they want to get to. What they are today serves as a similar purpose. It depends on where you live. In the Oklahoma City metropolitan area for a long time, and many people today, a street is a place for cars to carry people from one place to another. They are places upon which human feet are forbidden, upon which, only tires can run. And that's obviously the only place that your car can go, unless you really want to get familiar with the sidewalk or the open field next to your place. I don't know. But streets are public places. That's maybe the simplest way I can put it.
What would you say is something that we need to do more of here in Oklahoma City that you're maybe frustrated by, that we're not doing, that we could be?
There's a lot of things. I'm a great complainer. If there's one thing I think our community could be doing better, it's thinking in terms of a collective whole, thinking in terms of a community, not a collection of individuals, but a larger whole. Doing that consistently, and not just doing it when there's a crisis. I don't know as deeply what other cities did in response to the pandemic, but Oklahoma City did a lot of things that it had never done before, or had never done to the extent that it ended up doing as a response to the pandemic. I was interning with the Alliance for Economic Development during the pandemic when we launched this thing called the OKC Rescue Program. It was kind of a slate of a bunch of different sort of programs, grant programs, loan programs, mostly for small businesses, to keep them afloat, to spur economic development in the city. We were shelling out, I think we had a budget of $20 million that, in the grand scheme of things, I think that Oklahoma City got $100 million in state and local fiscal recovery funds. But we spent a lot of that trying to save people's businesses, trying to keep their doors open. And it was something that, we might be the 28th biggest city in America, but we're also one of the larger cities that are still conservatively minded, and not just like fiscally conservatively minded, but generally the administration of Oklahoma City specifically is kind of fundamentally conservative in a political sense. But we have that momentary compassion. We have that compassionate response to a crisis like the pandemic that I found to be really exciting. Something that's similar that happened, rewind 30 plus years ago in 1990, in the early 90s, we were coming out of an oil glut that was happening nationwide. The city was really struggling economically, financially, losing people. We as a city were trying to recruit businesses, corporations from outside to come in. And we kept hearing the same thing from a lot of these corporations, that this was not a city that the employees wanted to live in. We realized that we were in a crisis, that we were a city that was about to lose its population and start to shrink. And what we did is we started this thing called Metropolitan Area Projects. We did public works projects. We New Dealed our own city. And we funded it by taxing ourselves an extra 1% on purchases, and built things in the city. A lot of these things were livability specific initiatives. They weren't necessarily like full on work programs, but these were things that we did with for ourselves because we realized that we were in a crisis. That's something that after the 8-year course of building things that came out of the first MAPS program, we had a MAPS 2, which was called MAPS for Kids. It was doing the exact same thing, but investing in schools across the city because I don't exactly know what the politics were at the time, but we had a lot of schools that were in disrepair that required, I think it might have been around $500 to $600 million in public investment. Fast forward to 2007, 8, we have this thing called MAPS 3, where we kind of went back to the basics of the first MAPS program. And we did another slate of initiatives investing in ourselves. We are lucky in the second and third and fourth MAPS iterations. The fourth one came around in 2019-ish, something like that. We're lucky that we did these things, that these things passed without us being in a crisis like we had been back in the 1990s to get this whole thing started. I think we are, as a community, learning how to invest in ourselves and not just when we're like on a knife's edge, when we're like at the edge of a cliff. I think that MAPS has really gotten us there. It's kind of whatever the formula is to make that sell to the public. It's like a whole slate of different projects that have broad interest collectively, also are marketing it in a very interesting way. You have a sports element to us that appeals to the general public and also lots of different things. We are learning how to invest in ourselves and think collectively, even if it is still kind of like has a little bit of an individualist pitch to it. And when I say like collectively and individualist, I'm not a communist. I'm not a socialist. These are the dynamics that come when you have a government that is expected to provide services, infrastructure, and provide the basis on which economies and communities and cultures can grow. It's a choice, it's a choice that every community faces, how much they want to invest in their citizens and how much they want to ask from their citizens in order to accomplish that investment. Oklahoma City for a long time was not asking very much and not providing very much. We had a crisis. We started to make a pivot. We've been building upon that over the past 30 years or so. And now we're a city that's got a lot of success, that's going for a lot of really great things. Alongside those successes, we've seen a lot of investments that we had never seen, 10 years ago. What year is it? It's 2025 right now. 15 years ago, I don't know that we had a single dedicated bike lane in this city. I don't think that we did. We started with our downtown and we diced up our downtown with this thing called Project 180. We changed the one-way roads through downtown to two-way because we realized if you make it really easy for people to leave downtown, they're not going to stay in downtown. We started to add trees and we started to expand sidewalks. We started to build separated bicycle lanes and we kept the on-street parking. Anyway, we're building upon that today. We have a steady stream of sidewalk and bike lane projects that are going through. We have maybe a 1 year, 2 year backlog in the Oklahoma City Public Works Department on restripings and sidewalk constructions and all these other things. We are really making a difference in building things for everybody. And it's a positive future. And I think that we're going in the right direction. I do think that we could keep pushing the bill. We've moved the needle for bike lanes, for example. We moved the needle on people accepting bike lanes so much in the past 15 years. And now we're kind of coasting on that. I do think it's time for us to continue really building that infrastructure for ourselves as a collective. Maybe that's not necessarily for like the city government to do. Maybe it needs an outside force to make that kind of thing happen. I'm not sure. I think as a community, we just need to think as a community consistently, not in response to crisis, but we have to have a culture of empathy and a culture of consideration for everybody that lives in our city.
Yeah, and something you touched on there that I actually want to take a step further is in terms of bicycle infrastructure in OKC. I'm one of the people that lives here who has ridden a bike around the city a little bit, and the infrastructure that's been implemented is way better than the parts of the city where there is none. But I'm curious if you have any insight into whether we may take it that step further. When will we see the first bike only street in OKC or something like that?
Yeah, I think we're in a stage right now where we're coasting on the inroads we've made with broad public opinion. Over the past 15 years, we've changed broad public opinion to where bike lanes are not entirely abnormal. You can now like make a pitch to the average person that, hey, if you have a bike lane, that means that the bike is not going to be in the roadway blocking you from getting from point A to point B. That's something that makes sense to people now. And once you convince the general public and your city council knows that you're not going to get pushback, the city council can tell the city manager to, hey, fund this. We are coasting off that place that we are right now and expanding the network of bike lanes. It's incremental, it's gradual. You get out to the not downtown core areas. You get in southeast Oklahoma City. On the south side, we have a lot of what Oklahoma City planners term tier 2 and tier 3 bike infrastructure. Tier 2 and tier 3 is what we call sharrows, which is like shared roadways that have pavement markings that say bikes are allowed to occupy this lane in full. Talk about the effectiveness of that. There's a conversation to be had there, but you slowly change the temperature on those roadways that currently have sharrows. Currently, bikes can use the full thing, and a driver that goes down that road might encounter one every once in a while that's occupying the full lane. And then you fast forward to a year from then, and you've earned enough familiarity and normalization with people that use those roads that you can now probably make a pitch for it to be a separated bike lane that's an on-street bike lane and not just a sharrow. You do that at scale across the city. You expand outward slowly from the downtown area, and you can make a lot of progress that way. Public opinion here in some ways moves pretty slow, and it took 15 years for us to go to having some visible level of bike lane network in the core of downtown and into the inner old neighborhoods of Oklahoma City. And so there are little areas of innovation, test cases that are going to happen in the near future when it comes to bike lanes as a mode of transit, not just recreation stuff, because like we have separated multi-use trails around several of our lakes in a couple of other areas in the city that again are mostly for recreation. And those you'll actually be able to expand and build on probably a lot easier as long as you keep them away from the roadways. But there's pushback from the general public, which will be a continuing resistance point for the foreseeable future. That's what's going to make it so that it is incremental progress and not like big progress over a short period of time. You also have kind of internal chilling factors. This is something that, when I mentioned earlier, we kind of have like a conservative government to us in Oklahoma City. It's not nearly as bad as a lot of other places, but one of the areas that you see it, and you see a divide in cultures, is between like the city planning floor that has, let's say, the transportation planners in the city of Oklahoma City offices that really want to put fully separated bike lanes that travel not just next to or not just on a street, and the paint is what differentiates them, but they want to put delineators, or what some people call bollards, that will actually separate and create a layer of safety. Or they want to put a bike lane on the street that is next to the sidewalk. There's the sidewalk, there's the bike lane, and then there's your on-street parking, where you have parking that's going to protect those bikers. They're new urban design elements in the context of this city. They're not new in the grander scheme of bike infrastructure, but the thing that kind of chills these ideas that will come out of the city planning office is how public works will respond to them. The public works department is going to see these things, and because they haven't seen these things before, or, naturally, it's organic, it's natural, it really is. Feel apprehensive, especially if you're a licensed professional engineer. Every single thing that you put your stamp on is like a question of your legitimacy as a builder. And so you have to take a kind of a natively conservative approach in order to do your job well. I would say that it's a leadership question in some ways. It's also kind of like a hiring and like general staffing thing in other ways. If you don't have engineers that come from other cities where they have been exposed to this kind of infrastructure, you will naturally have a greater chilling effect. And I'm implying here that the public works department is just a bunch of people that are from Oklahoma. I don't know that to be true, but what I do know about the city planning office in Oklahoma City and the city planning offices in a lot of other municipalities in the region and across Oklahoma is that a lot of the talent that is here comes from here. one of the downsides of being a a low cost of living state is that you also have low salaries. And so like in the national market, when it comes to city planning, you're not going to be really competitive in recruiting from outside of the state. I would have to assume that the same thing happens at a certain scale within public works and engineering. Petroleum engineering, the oil and gas industry, that's a whole different thing. We're probably nationally competitive in that industry. But if you're talking about civil engineers that sit in the public works office in the city of Oklahoma City, I would expect that they are probably going to be people that are from here or from smaller places that have, again, less exposure to these unique kinds of infrastructure that will come here. And so there's kind of feedback loops that are embedded within our own city administration that slow progress. But I think we are accelerating in terms of at least the public opinion side of things. And I think we'll be able to, if we keep being strategic about where we put our innovative and inventive exploratory projects, we'll probably have a good 10 years ahead of us.
Very nice. What would you recommend to somebody who's interested in getting involved with city planning?
The hard part about becoming a city planner is not going to grad school and getting the experience that you need to, get out of grad school and then start that first job. For me, at least, the hard part about becoming a city planner was learning that the profession existed. It took a long road to get to where I am education wise. And I started from a weird place, but I didn't learn about the concept of city planning or economic development or any of these sort of things until I was on like my I think it was my third or fourth year of undergraduate of college. And I had just never learned about this as a profession. It's easy to talk about engineers. Everybody knows that engineers build things and then so on and so on. But it's also like these are the kind of things that are reinforced in our public education system that are easy for kids to grab onto. We need a bit more focalization from the city planning industry to our youth. I'm not saying we need like youth whatever to engage with people in educational institutions, but I do think in the educational system we could probably do a better job with like civics and learning how city governments work and learning how things get built. If you're interested in being a city planner, I think the first thing that will make the whole thing easier for you is finding a place that you care about and focusing all of your energy there. I got to where I am today because the Oklahoma City Maps story was something that I thought was really interesting. I was like, wow, it's make change by inspiring people. It was the power of ideas that made everyone say, okay, yeah, I'll throw in an extra penny every single time I buy anything to make a sports arena happen. It was a really simple notion, and it was something that like sparked joy. And I didn't even really fall in love with Oklahoma City as a place. I fell in love with the idea of government as a foundation to invest in other people. And I do love Oklahoma City, by the way. If you want to be a city planner, you have to care about the people you live next to. You have to care about the community. You have to see it as a community as a whole, the place where you live or the place that you want to live. And you kind of have to just follow it. You can be a city planner proper, like I am sitting in my office doing transportation planning stuff, working on like program evaluation and scoring people's sidewalk projects every day, or working in the current planning office and taking a look at every developer's, plans for their new single family home or for their commercial property that they want to build. You can also keep a close eye on what your streets and your sidewalks and your neighborhood look like. Talk to people about how they feel about the places that they live. Talk to people about the feeling that you get when you realize that like your porch might be 40 feet away from your neighbor's porch, but you almost never see each other just sitting around and doing that because like the way that our houses are built are a different shape. And because we're set back from the street very far, you can't actually see the person that lives across the street from you very easily. You start to understand the intersection between like human behavior and the built environment. And it's like seeing the Matrix and like, oh, the entire world that we built for ourselves, it can be extremely isolating depending on the house that you grew up in or the neighborhood that you grew up in. You become a city planner by caring about that and realizing that it can be changed. You speak to your neighbor and then you both go to the next city council meeting or the next neighborhood association meeting and talk about the things that you care about and look at the people that are listening at the other end and realize that they are just as human as you are and that government, neighborhoods, connections between human beings are literally just things that we've made up along the way in our development as humans. Like there's the reason that your street is the width that it is because like in the last 100 years, 100 engineers have touched 100 different planning documents and like made this be like the common practice. One of your friends that lives across town in the older part of town, like just happens to have a really skinny street and they happen to be really close with their neighbor because that street was built before either of you were born. When people were building things at the scale for people, for humans, not for cars, to be able to travel easily. It's all happenstance. It's all happenstances of history, and it's all happenstances of history until you decide that it needs to change. You just have to, the way that anything changes is you talk to the next person in charge and you make sure that the change that you want to advocate for is actually something that multiple people want. Because I've seen plenty of city council meetings where people want this change to happen or don't want this change to happen, and they're really speaking for themselves and they feel really strongly for themselves. And that doesn't mean that your opinion is not valuable. It just means that it is one of many. But yeah, it's city planning. It became a formalized industry long after cities were planned. Now people like me have a monopoly on how to build cities, and we've put a ton of roadblocks in the way of the average person in terms of codes of ordinances and building codes and urban design standards and engineering standards and all these other things. We put a lot of roadblocks in the way of the average human being to be able to change the way that their environment is built. And if you want to be a city planner, you either have to become the power that is, or if you're feeling rambunctious, you can fight the powers that be. I don't know.
I think that's a solid one-liner to end on. Ethan, Mazzio, thank you for joining me today. I think this was a fun discussion, and hopefully you'll be back again in the future.
I'd love to. I appreciate the conversation, and I will now warn all of your listeners to listen to this at 1.5 speed.
Now that they've listened to the whole thing. Well, thank you very much.
Okay, appreciate it. Thanks.
Hey, it's me, Kyler. If you enjoyed this conversation, please be sure to give the show a like, rating, subscription, or whatever kind of nice feedback you can provide on whatever platform you're watching or listening from. If you'd like to join our community to stay up to date or to discuss anything you heard in today's show, consider joining the Eryngo Urbanism Discord server. And finally, if you'd like to support the work of Eryngo Urbanism directly, you can do so over on Patreon. Until next time.